are talking Skeletons in the Closet, directed by Asif Akbar, and this one's got a pretty impressive cast. We've got Terrence Howard, we've got Udo Kier, Louis Mandelot and Cuba Gooding Jr. So a few recognisable faces here, and this story has elements of lots of things in it. It effectively tells the story of a family, a father and husband, the wife and mother and a young girl. And this family seems to be having a rash of bad luck. The daughter has had cancer previously and it's come back. Just at the same time, their insurance isn't paying out. Terrence Howard's the husband loses his job. It's all going wrong. And all at the same time, the wife is seeing ghostly figures that no one else can see, apparently. So the husband does what every parent in need would do, go to the mob for help, and ends up kind of getting indebted to the mob. So we've got the father getting involved with the mafia, we've got the mother seeing ghosts, and then the pair of them decide to go to a spirit medium, which then ends up doing some type of black magic ritual, which complicates matters further. Add to that, we've got a killer scarecrow, a kind of a member of the family coming back from the past who long forgotten, and a big backstory with flashbacks. Sounds complicated? There's a lot to this one. They've thrown everything and the kitchen sink in there. Anyway, let's talk about it. What works in this movie's favour? It is clearly a low budget, and probably the bulk of the money, I would assume, has gone to the cast here, with some, as I say, relatively kind of high-profile names here. And Terrence Howard, who actually co-wrote the movie, I should mention, is the male lead in this movie. So it's not one of these kind of like geezer teaser type movies where he's barely in it. He's actually the male lead in the movie. And Cuba Gooding Jr. has a reasonable size supporting role. Louis Mandelot and Udo Kier have smaller parts. But they're all kind of like well-respected, award-winning actors, many of them. So, it's good to see high-caliber actors in a kind of a lower-budget movie. But as I say, I assume that's probably where the movie's budget went. It does have many kind of pokers in the fire, you might say. There's a lot going on in this movie, which is, I guess, a benefit in some ways, because there's lots of things to kind of like keep you occupied, but it does become a detriment as well, I will say. I actually found the premise quite interesting because we have so many facets to the kind of the story, and you're not quite sure where it's going to be going and kind of tie it all in ultimately. There seems to be a lot of moving parts in this film, and this family seems to be in genuine kind of dire straits. There's some kind of like fun, low budget effects. I kind of quite liked our Scarecrow character. I thought, he was kind of done quite well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about all the effects. If you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. But I quite like the practical elements to the effects here, and Udo Kier especially is very kind of creepy as a kind of sinister occultist. So I quite liked that kind of element to it. And I'm going to say, I think, some of the characters, even though they don't really have a lot to do, some of them, I quite like Cuba Gooding Jr. here as this kind of like a bit of a rebel brother who just got out of prison, but he has that kind of carefree attitude, and I just quite liked his relationship with the Terrence Howard character and stuff like that. And I'm going to say, I think the first half of this movie, which focuses very much on the Terrence Howard character, I think gives an interesting kind of setup. But now let us transition to what does not work. I feel this movie is mostly set up. Because it introduces so many elements, it spends a lot of time having all of these kind of like different angles that are played up. You're wondering how it's all going to kind of tie together, and then the end of it feels really truncated. We have a big long flashback, and it just feels somewhat unsatisfying and mixed. And like certain plot elements here, I'm not going to give specifics, just seem to be completely abandoned. It's an odd choice. There's it has 3 credited writers, one of which is Terrence Howard. It just seems to be all over the place, the story on this one. It doesn't really seem like it knows what it wants to be. So I think, it sets up a few interesting kind of story elements, some of which are very much real world problems. Your daughter's got cancer, you owe money to the mob, so they're kind of, your real world problems. But then you've got the supernatural ones, like there's this ghost hanging around. What's all this kind of occult black magic got to do with it? What's this scarecrow character got relevance to it? And then, man, there's a lot going on, but it doesn't really ever mesh. And some things seem to be just completely like, well, we introduced it. Line of dialogue, that's that kind of written out. We'll forget about that. Why introduce it? Seems a very messy movie. Now, it's not just the plot elements that I feel are muddled. Like Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character, his character I quite enjoyed. I quite liked his scenes, but he has very little to actually do in the film. His character's, impact on the story, outside of introducing his brother to some gangsters, doesn't really amount to much. But he is given a reasonable amount of screen time, particularly in the first act of the movie, where we have quite long, protracted sequences with Terrence Howard and Cuba Gooding Jr. like drinking in this bar. Are they going to have some big impact on the story? No, not really. And then Louis Mandylor, he's like really only in the last few minutes of the movie. Very late introduction into this film. It just seems oddly put together, this film. So I think it comes across as a bit of a mess. Now, I mentioned I like some of the effects, but what we have to talk about here is some of the VFX, the visual effects, the CGI, the kind of the video effects. Because unlike the Scarecrow, they're not quite as fun. As I mentioned, I feel like the budget to this movie has primarily gone to the actors. But what it hasn't gone on is the VFX. The kind of the video effects, I don't even want to call them CGI if I'm honest. They look like they've come out of a $75 Adobe Effects, After Effects package, and they've been added on by like an intern. It looks like that. I mean, the quality of the video effects here is really cheap looking. And in the subject of cheap looking, the movie just has this general feel of it looks like a daytime soap is the best way I'd describe it. But it isn't, because we do have a few like swear words and stuff in here and that, and so it's a real like odd mess of a film with plot lines that go nowhere. We have Terrence Howard as the kind of the focal point of the character in the first half of the movie, and then it switches up to his wife, but this includes like a large flashback of her childhood. She's the focus of the second half of the movie, and Terrence Howard barely gets a look in. So you never have like a connection to a main character, because the wife doesn't really register that much in the first half, and then Terrence Howard's barely seen in the second half. It's a really odd movie that's kind of just feels like it's been hodgepodge together. There are elements here that I thought were interesting, and I said it introduces so many problems to this family to come over. I was like, blimey, I mean, how are they going to deal with this smorgasbord of issues? But they don't really deal with it, if you ask me. So a few interesting ideas, some decent actors, and the performances weren't bad, but the actual narrative is just completely all over the place, and then some characters and story elements just seem completely irrelevant. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. It isn't. I don't think it's a terrible movie, but it's just a mess. So 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.